She learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to her. She didn't lose her softness, she protected it. When a woman begins to set boundaries without guilt, it does not mean she is hardened, it means she has finally listened to herself. For a long time, her instincts may have whispered warnings she ignored, tightness in her chest when she said yes too quickly, exhaustion that followed every act of emotional generosity, the quiet resentment that came from giving more than she received. She was taught, subtly and repeatedly, that love meant endurance, that kindness meant self-erasure, and that being good meant being endlessly available. So she learned to betray herself gently, one small compromise at a time. At first, her lack of boundaries felt like connection. She answered messages even when she was tired. She stayed silent when something hurt her, convincing herself it wasn't worth the conflict. She adjusted her needs so others could remain comfortable, and every time she did, she told herself she was being understanding, mature, loving. But the psyche keeps its own record. What is denied does not disappear, it accumulates. Over time, that accumulation becomes fatigue, anxiety, irritability, or a dull sense of invisibility. She may not have known why she felt empty, only that something within her was slowly withdrawing. Setting boundaries without guilt begins the moment she realizes that discomfort is not a moral failure. Saying no does not make her selfish. Expressing limits does not make her difficult. These ideas challenge deeply rooted beliefs, especially for women conditioned to equate worth with usefulness. Guilt appears not because the boundary is wrong, but because it threatens an old identity. The identity of the one who is always accommodating, always forgiving, always available. Letting go of that identity feels like loss, even when it is liberation. When she starts to honor her boundaries, something subtle but powerful happens. She no longer reacts automatically. She pauses. She feels into her body before she responds. She asks herself whether her yes is genuine or simply habitual. This pause alone changes her inner world. She begins to recognize that her energy is finite, that her emotional presence is valuable, and that access to her should be earned through respect, not assumed through familiarity. This awareness creates an inner alignment she may never have known before, a sense that her actions finally match her truth. People around her feel this shift before they understand it. Some respond with confusion. They may say she has changed, that she is distant, that she is no longer the same. What they often mean is that they can no longer cross her boundaries unnoticed. The version of her that absorbed emotional labor without complaint is gone. In its place stands someone quieter, steadier, less reactive. This steadiness can be unsettling, especially to those who benefited from her self-abandonment. Boundaries expose dynamics that once hid behind politeness. Guilt still arises at first. It is the echo of old conditioning, not a signal of wrongdoing. She may feel it when she declines an invitation, when she speaks honestly instead of smoothing things over, when she chooses rest over obligation. But unlike before, she does not obey the guilt. She observes it. She understands that guilt is often the price of growth, especially when growth disrupts familiar patterns. Over time, as her nervous system adjusts, the guilt softens. What replaces it is relief, a quiet relief that comes from not betraying herself. Setting boundaries without guilt also reshapes her relationships. Conversations become more honest, sometimes more uncomfortable, but ultimately more real. She no longer over-explains her decisions in hopes of being understood. She learns that explanation is not the same as permission. This is a profound psychological shift. She stops asking others to validate her limits and starts trusting her own inner authority. With this trust comes dignity. Her words carry more weight because they are no longer diluted by fear of rejection. There is also grief in this process. She may mourn the years she spent believing love required self-sacrifice to the point of depletion. She may grieve relationships that cannot survive her newfound clarity. But this grief is clean. It does not rot inside her. It passes through her, leaving behind wisdom. She begins to see that boundaries do not destroy intimacy, they make it possible. Only when she is not performing can she truly connect. As she practices setting boundaries, her sense of self strengthens. She feels less fragmented, less divided between who she is and who she pretends to be. This integration brings a calm confidence that does not need to announce itself. Her presence changes. She listens more deeply because she is no longer resentful. She gives more freely because she is no longer overgiving. This balance is felt by everyone who encounters her. Respect arises naturally, not because she demands it, but because she models it. In learning to say no without guilt, she learns something even deeper. that her worth was never dependent on how much she could endure. It was always inherent. Boundaries do not make her less loving. They make her love more honest, and in that honesty, she finally becomes whole. When a woman stops seeking validation, the change is not immediately visible to the world, but it is seismic within her inner life. For years, she may have measured her worth through reactions, through praise that made her feel seen, through attention that reassured her she mattered, through approval that temporarily quieted the doubt she carried. Validation became a language she learned early, often without realizing it, shaped by subtle messages that love is something to be earned, not something assumed. Over time, this search for affirmation turned into a quiet dependence, one that kept her attentive to others' responses while slowly disconnecting her from her own inner voice. At first, seeking validation feels like connection. She checks her phone hoping for a message, replays conversations to see if she sounded acceptable, adjusts her behavior to maintain harmony. Each smile, each compliment offers a brief sense of safety. But safety built this way is fragile. When approval is delayed or withdrawn, anxiety rises. She begins to doubt herself, not because she has done something wrong, but because her sense of value has been outsourced. Psychologically, this creates an inner split, one part of her living authentically, another constantly monitoring how she is perceived. This split is exhausting, even if she cannot yet name why. The turning point often comes not through success, but through fatigue. She grows tired of performing emotional calculations, tired of being shaped by the moods and expectations of others. Perhaps she notices that no amount of praise ever feels sufficient, that the relief fades quickly, leaving her hungry again. This realization can be painful because it exposes a truth she has avoided. External validation can never provide internal security. What comes from outside can never replace what must be rooted within. When she begins to release the need for validation, she does not become indifferent. She becomes grounded. She starts listening inwardly, asking herself what feels right rather than what will be approved. This shift is subtle at first. She may still enjoy compliments, but they no longer determine her mood. She may still care about being liked, but she no longer sacrifices her truth to achieve it. Her sense of worth slowly relocates from the reactions of others to the alignment she feels within herself. This alignment brings a quiet steadiness, one that does not rise and fall with applause or criticism. People around her sense this change, even if they cannot explain it. She speaks with less urgency, less need to convince. Her presence feels calmer, less dependent. Conversations no longer revolve around proving herself or seeking reassurance. Instead, there is space. This space can feel unsettling to those accustomed to her seeking their approval. When she stops asking to be chosen, the dynamic shifts. She's no longer negotiating her value. She is inhabiting it. Emotionally, this transformation is deeply freeing, but it is not without discomfort. Letting go of validation can feel like stepping into emptiness. She may fear invisibility, fear rejection, fear that without constant affirmation she will disappear. These fears are remnants of an earlier survival strategy, one that once protected her. Acknowledging this allows her to move forward with compassion rather than judgment. She understands that seeking validation was never weakness, it was adaptation. But adaptation is not destiny. As she becomes more self-referenced, her relationships change. She chooses honesty over harmony, depth over approval. This does not make her harsh, it makes her real. She expresses joy without exaggeration and sadness without apology. When conflict arises, she no longer sees it as a threat to her worth. She can tolerate disagreement because her identity is no longer at stake. This emotional resilience strengthens her sense of self and creates healthier connections, ones based on mutual respect rather than silent performance. Her creativity also shifts. When validation is no longer the goal, expression becomes more authentic. She creates, speaks, and contributes because it feels true, not because it guarantees praise. This authenticity resonates more deeply than any attempt to impart. Studies on motivation show that intrinsic motivation leads to greater satisfaction and sustainability than extrinsic reward. She may not know these studies, but she feels the truth of them in her body. What comes from within lasts longer. Over time, the absence of constant validation reveals something unexpected: peace. A peace that does not depend on being seen, admired, or approved. She realizes that her worth was never something others could give or take away. It existed before opinion, before applause, before rejection. By reclaiming it, she becomes less reactive and more intentional. Her presence carries a quiet confidence that does not demand attention, yet naturally commands respect. In releasing the need for validation, she returns to herself. She becomes whole, not because she has been affirmed, but because she has remembered who she is when no one is watching. When low-value relationships begin to fall away from a woman's life, it is rarely sudden and almost never dramatic. It unfolds quietly as awareness replaces tolerance. For a long time, she may have stayed where she was unseen, unheard, or inconsistently loved, telling herself that patience was strength and endurance was loyalty. She learned to rationalize neglect, to reinterpret indifference as depth, and to minimize her own needs so others could remain comfortable. These relationships did not collapse all at once. They slowly drained her, one unanswered need at a time. What changes is not her circumstances, but her perception. She begins to notice patterns she once ignored. The way effort is one-sided, the way respect appears only when convenient, the way her presence is valued only when it serves someone else's needs. This noticing is painful because it dismantles hope. Hope often keeps people attached long after reality has revealed itself. Letting go of hope can feel like failure, but in truth it is clarity. She realizes that connection without reciprocity is not love, and familiarity without care is not safety. As her inner standards shift, so do her emotional responses. She no longer feels compelled to chase attention or explain her worth. Silence no longer terrifies her because she has learned to be present with herself. This inner grounding changes the relational dynamic. Low-value relationships rely on imbalance, on one person giving more, excusing more, waiting longer. When she stops over-functioning, the imbalance becomes obvious. Without her constant effort, the relationship reveals its true structure, and many connections cannot survive that exposure. There is often guilt at this stage. She may question whether she is being too harsh, too demanding, too changed. Society often rewards women for loyalty at any cost, even when that loyalty erodes their self-respect. Walking away can feel like betrayal, especially if she has invested years of emotional labor, but slowly she understands that staying in spaces where she is diminished is a deeper betrayal to hers. This realization is not empowering in a loud way, it is sobering. It carries grief but also relief. As low-value relationships fall away, emptiness appears. This emptiness can be frightening because it removes distraction. She may feel alone even while surrounded by people, or paradoxically more alone after leaving them. Yet this space is not punishment, it is transition. Psychologically, emptiness often precedes integration. Without constant emotional noise, she can hear her own thoughts again. She can feel what she actually needs, rather than what she has been conditioned to accept. The absence of draining connections creates room for discernment. People who benefited from her lack of boundaries may resist this change. They may accuse her of being distant, selfish, or cold. These reactions are less about her behavior and more about the loss of access. When she no longer tolerates disrespect or inconsistency, those who offered only fragments of care feel exposed. She does not argue or defend herself as she once did. She understands now that not every misunderstanding requires clarification. Some people understand perfectly well. They simply preferred her silent compliance. As these relationships fade, her energy begins to return. She notices she is less anxious, less resentful, less exhausted. Emotional labor once spent managing others' moods is reclaimed. This reclaimed energy strengthens her sense of self and sharpens her intuition. She becomes more selective, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. She learns to observe how people show up over time, not how they speak in moments of charm or crisis. Consistency becomes more attractive than intensity, safety more valuable than excitement. This process also reshapes how she experiences love. She no longer confuses longing with connection or attachment with intimacy. She understands that love does not require self-abandonment, and that mutual effort is not a luxury but a foundation. Relationships that felt thrilling now feel chaotic. What once felt familiar now feels limiting. This shift can be disorienting, because growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Yet something steady emerges in her, a quiet self-respect that does not need external reinforcement. She does not announce her standards, she lives them. Low-value relationships fall away not because she pushes them out, but because she no longer fits into spaces that demand her diminishment. What remains or eventually arrives, carries a different quality, mutuality, presence, and respect. In letting go of what cannot meet her, she does not become hardened. She becomes honest, and in that honesty, she chooses herself without apology, creating a life that no longer requires her to disappear in order to belong. When a woman no longer tolerates emotional neglect, it is not because she has become demanding, but because she has become aware. Emotional neglect is subtle. It rarely arrives as cruelty. It comes as a sense, as postponed conversations, as affection that appears only when convenient. For a long time, she may have accepted this emptiness, convincing herself that love was quiet, that asking for more would be selfish, that patience would eventually be rewarded. She learned to fill the gaps herself, to carry the emotional weight of two people, and to call this strength. In the beginning, neglect often disguises itself as normalcy. She tells herself that everyone is busy, that silence does not mean disinterest, that inconsistency is just part of modern life. She remembers the moments of connection and uses them to justify long stretches of distance. This selective memory keeps her hopeful, yet her body knows the truth long before her mind accepts it. She feels lonely even in the relationship. She feels unseen while being physically present. These feelings do not arise from neediness, they arise from unmet emotional connection. The realization comes gradually. She notices that her efforts to communicate are met with deflection, that her vulnerability is acknowledged but not held, that her emotional needs are postponed indefinitely. Over time, she understands that emotional neglect is not about intention, but impact. Someone does not have to mean harm to cause it. Love that is inconsistent still wounds. Attention that is conditional still erodes self-worth. This clarity changes how she interprets her own pain. She stops asking why she is so sensitive and starts asking why she has been settling. When she decides she will no longer tolerate emotional neglect, guilt often follows. She may worry that her needs are excessive or unreasonable. Many women are taught to be emotionally adaptable, to adjust rather than ask, to understand rather than expect. This conditioning makes neglect feel familiar, even safe. Choosing something different feels risky, but she begins to see that the price of familiarity has been her aliveness. Emotional neglect did not break her suddenly. It slowly taught her to expect less. As she honors her need for emotional presence, her behavior changes. She speaks more clearly and listens more closely, not only to others but to herself. She no longer chases closeness or explains why she deserves attention. She observes. She notices who shows up consistently and who disappears when depth is required. This observation brings grief, because it reveals truths she once avoided. Yet it also brings relief. She no longer has to guess where she stands. Clarity replaces confusion. Those who offered partial connection often react strongly to her change. They may accuse her of being demanding or dramatic. These reactions are defenses, not truths. Emotional neglect survives on ambiguity. When she names her needs, the ambiguity dissolves. She no longer accepts crumbs disguised as effort. This does not mean she seeks perfection. It means she seeks presence. She understands now that emotional availability is not an extra. It is the foundation of intimacy. Her nervous system begins to shift as well. Without constant uncertainty, her anxiety lessens. She is no longer waiting for replies or scanning for signs of affection. This calm is unfamiliar at first. Chaos can feel like passion when neglect has been normalized. Stillness can feel empty when one is used to emotional hunger. But over time, her body recognizes safety. Safety does not excite, it stabilizes. In this stability, she becomes more herself. She also releases the fantasy that her love alone can awaken someone else's capacity. This is one of the hardest lessons. Love does not heal emotional unavailability. Patience does not create presence. Understanding does not replace effort. Accepting this truth is painful because it ends the illusion of control. But it also restores her power. She no longer tries to earn connection through endurance. She chooses connection through reciprocity. As emotional neglect loses its grip, her standards change quietly. She values consistent sigh over intensity, follow through over promises, and emotional responsiveness over charm. Relationships that once felt normal now feel hollow. This awareness does not make her bitter, it makes her discerning. She becomes capable of walking away without hatred, without blame, without drama. She understands that absence of care is not something to negotiate with. In choosing not to tolerate emotional neglect, she does not become less loving. She becomes more honest about what love requires, and in honoring her need for emotional presence, she reclaims the part of herself that once waited in silence, believing that wanting more was the same as asking for too much. When a woman becomes selective rather than bitter, it is often misunderstood by those who have not witnessed the long road that led her there. From the outside, her calm detachment can look like indifference, and her discernment can be mistaken for coldness. But bitterness is born from resentment, while selectivity is born from understanding. She has felt the cost of giving too freely, loving too quickly, and trusting without evidence. What emerges now is not hardness of heart but clarity of mind. For a long time, she may have believed that openness meant availability, that kindness required endless access. She welcomed people quickly, extended grace repeatedly, and stayed longer than she should have, hoping effort would be met with effort. When it wasn't, disappointment accumulated quietly. Bitterness often begins here, in the gap between expectation and reality. But instead of letting that disappointment calcify into anger, she chose reflection. She began asking why she kept offering her depth to those unable or unwilling to meet it. Selectivity is the result of this reflection. She learns to pause before attaching, to observe patterns rather than promises. This pause is not fear, it is awareness. She notices how someone responds to her boundaries, how they handle discomfort, how consistent they are when no reward is guaranteed. She no longer rushes intimacy to avoid loneliness. She understands that loneliness within a connection is more damaging than solitude. This understanding protects her from repeating old cycles. Emotionally, this shift brings a new relationship with trust. She does not withhold it as punishment, nor does she offer it as currency. Trust becomes something that grows through shared experience. This slower pace feels unfamiliar at first. There was a time when intensity felt like connection, and immediacy felt like commitment. Now she sees how intensity can mask instability, and how urgency can disguise insecurity. Selectivity teaches her that safety is built gradually, not seized impulsively. People who expect instant access may feel rejected by her discernment. They may say she has changed, that she is guarded, that she asks for too much. But what has changed is not her capacity to love. It is her willingness to abandon herself. She no longer confuses being chosen with being valued. Being selective allows her to choose in return. This mutual choosing is the foundation of healthy connection, yet it feels revolutionary to those accustomed to one-sided emotional labor. There is also tenderness in her selectivity. She is more patient, not less. She listens carefully, responds intentionally, and invests where there is alignment. Because she is no longer scattered across unreciprocated bonds, her presence deepens. She becomes more available to the few who truly see her, rather than vaguely present to many who do not. This depth creates intimacy that bitterness never could. Selectivity also reshapes how she responds to disappointment. When something does not align, she no longer internalizes it as failure. She does not chase closure or demand explanation. She understands that incompatibility is not rejection, and disinterest is not an indictment of her worth. This emotional independence is not detachment from feeling, but freedom within it. She can feel disappointment without being consumed by it. As she becomes more selective, her boundaries strengthen naturally. She does not announce them, she lives them. She leaves situations that feel draining without guilt. She declines invitations that do not nourish her. This quiet self-respect is often more powerful than confrontation. It signals to others that access to her inner world is earned through consistency, not assumed through charm. This way of being also changes her relationship with hope. She no longer hopes someone will become what they are not. She hopes instead to meet those who already are. This hope is grounded, not desperate. It allows her to remain open without being naive. She can see potential without clinging to it, and possibility without sacrificing reality. In becoming selective rather than bitter, she preserves her softness. Bitterness would have hardened her, turned pain into armor. Selectivity does the opposite. It protects her gentleness so it can be offered where it will be honored. She is no longer available to chaos but deeply available to connection. This is not withdrawal from life or love. It is engagement with both at a higher standard. And in choosing discernment over resentment, she creates space for relationships that do not require her to be less in order to belong. She did not become harder, she became clearer. And in that clarity, she stopped offering herself to what could not honor her. What remained was peace. Not because life became perfect, but because she finally chose herself.